good evening. Welcome robot enthusiasts to our robot show on innovative potential. This is the world of innovative potential, and I'm your host Jordache. Hello, good evening. If you tonight's about robots, beep boop beep boop, robots everywhere. Robots have many good uses, applicable uses, but this is one of those things that it's kind of one of those like scary topics for me because it's like, admittedly, it's one of the most furthest. It's the most furthest things that I haven't done, sort of yet. Like the furthest extent of my robotics knowledge is probably the Puppet Master class in Final Fantasy XI from back in the 2006 days. When it was released under the Treasures of Adergan. So that kind of puts everything in a... so what gives you the authority of talking about robotics? And it's sort of like, well, in the last almost 20 years, a good 15 years, I've done some stuff. And I've learned different types of machines and different types of things on how machines work and just really what's going on with these. What the hell happened? You know, like we go from horse and carriage to machines and industry to electronics and TVs and radios, and now there's robots popping up, and then suddenly internet happens, and yeah, just sort of everybody's like, I don't know how to get a handle on all of this stuff. We have Wikipedia, but it's still very difficult to get a handle on everything, and that's kind of why these wheels of education kind of thing they're always turning, to be lame like that, but yeah, they're always turning, and you have to make your own wheel because it's the only way you're going to be able to understand it. And it's the only way you're going to be able to sort of like, hey, you know what? I can do this too. I can participate in the robot economy. And that's really important because it's like, yeah, there's lots of people that are able to participate in the machine economy, and we want to get the people from the machine economy into the robot economy, because a lot of people did a lot of work, and if you don't know how to program a robot, that's kind of number one industry right there, helping people program their own robot, but not with code. That's where Final Fantasy XI and the gaming community comes in, because a lot of the games and macros of those communities help to get people to just get the robot to do the simple commands that they want it to do. And in the last sort of 20 years since macroed machines came out, very simple robotics, we're at like Sapient. ChatGPT is fully capable of producing a sapient artificial intelligence. But we were introduced to sapient intelligence back in 2000 with Perfect Dark on the Nintendo 64, and again on the Xbox 360 in 2010. So this really isn't something new. For people who haven't played games or who are not in industry, it's just more, and the real part here that really kind of catches you like by surprise is that you're more scared that you didn't realize that these types of robots have been introduced to you, but they've basically really familiarized with like Rosie the robot from the Jetsons. She's a sapient AI, like AI robot. She's a fully functioning humanoid robot, but she's a housemaid. Wisecracking housemaid. So this type of like sci-fi stuff has been available sort of for your own imaginations since the 1960s and you know, Metropolis way before that. So this has been around since the Industrial Revolution. It's probably the purpose of the Industrial Revolution. How do you build a sapient robot to do your stuff for you? How do you get a mining robot to wisecrack while it's doing its job? These are some of the things and thoughts that I encountered with regards to robotics coming from industry, gaming, and it's just like analytical instrumentation, because a lot of kind of what happens here is the how do I put this? It's the, am I even on? Yeah, okay, we're on. It's the, here is machines, here is electronics, and then it's electronic machines in the middle. And then you have the third number on this one, and that's where robotics come in. Because you can have robotic machines that are not electronic. As strange as that sounds, robotic machines that are not electronic. These are like old steam engine type of like deals. You can set up something to do a repetitive task over and over, but for the most part, robotics is an electronic machine, an autonomous electronic machine. So without further ado, we're going to go through the wheel of robotics. Where I'm going to start with nested prioritization computing at the top, and just kind of follow the wheel around. I've broken robotics into 4 sections again. So Sapience, hardware, application, and environment. What's going on with Sapience is I originally started this with software. But what you really want your robot to do is be sapient. You want Rosie the robot. You want Dr. Carroll. You want Gur from Invader Zim. You want Data from Star Trek. That's sapience. That's what everybody wants, because that's what the person is. Even when there were slaves, the slave was still sapient. The person who was the slave is still sapient. So that's sort of like the historical concept of this, but it's still really, you still need somebody to talk to. Like, this is like avoiding that personality avoiding that robot personality, or the robot with a personality, sets robotics back further than if you just gave them a personality. Sets you back further than if you don't have a personality. So Mr. Personality, broadcasting live after dark. Let's talk about hardware. Hardware is hardware, so it's just basically how your robot interacts with its own skeleton and what its body and anatomy is made up with. Application is why did you build this robot, and then where is this robot going to be deployed, or how is it going to work, kind of thing. And the rest of them are actually really straightforward. The really biggest thing here is actually like making sure that the construction of the intelligence of the autonomous automaton is robust enough to function at least to the point where it's like an insect or a dog. Could we get a dog level, a parrot, a dolphin level naturalized intelligence out of this? And that's where like a lot of this talk is going to be on the Sapience here. So I'm just going to start right now. So what the hell is nested prioritization computing? Nested prioritization computing is basically how you calculate and derive your variables that are going to get you the freewheeling autonomous outcomes that your robot can then act upon and recognize it can act upon. What the hell does that mean? That means basically that you're gonna have to prioritize. It's nested. So there's one set of conditions, and those set of conditions are dependent on something internal to those other set of conditions. So you have this set of conditions going inside of another set of conditions that then makes these other outcomes dependent on those calculations. And you can have, and it's basically you're gonna have infinite, like you're gonna have like a lot of specifics of those, but hierarchical prioritization computing is also another sort of term for it. I like nested because how I'm going to structure the rest of this section, the Sapience section, versus hierarchical. And the difference here is that the way I structure this, it goes nested. You have your processor, your computing processor, but you're processing in order from environment, threat, self, same, and self-preservation. So what happens here is you calculate the wide field first because it allows you to know what context you're in. And then within that huge data, that huge variable set, so this is where you have to get your computer to recognize the environments it's in. It's environmental signal recognition and what is here, what is in your environment. So your robot or automaton has to be able to detect light. It needs to be able to detect its proximity and distances. It needs to be able to detect humidity, moisture, topography. It has to be able to detect that, like a river's topography is not the actual topography. You will have this, like, there is a disappearance because the robot will sink if it goes in a river, kind of thing. So all of these types of awarenesses have to be recognized computationally first and foremost. So you build like you're building a video game. Your robot has to build its environment first before there's actually a game to be played here. So your robot has to know that it exists, kind of, almost before it does anything. And then because all of your other interactions, all of your other signal processing is now functioning within the entire subset of its environmental recognition. So from this point forward, so you now set this like massive hyperscape that your robot centers in. It's like, okay, well, your robot now exists in a world it can recognize. If it can recognize it, it can function in it. And that's like number one priority. And this is constructed from basically how I play video games. The first thing, and I've watched films of myself playing video games, and like watching what's happening here is the first thing you're looking at is what you get so much information from the environment itself. You don't even know, you already know what type of game you're playing based on the environment itself. So build that into your robotic recognition systems so that those tropes and cliches are actually what's going to like power defeat the stupidity of your own robot, kind of thing. So, and how this is basically achieved is you take your camera high and you go through and you can either do it. I'm of a manual and analog type of thing. So here's a set of conditions. We're well past the point of this now with artificial intelligence. But being able to recognize and distinguish various, even just like here's an obstacle recognition is sort of your first biggest hurdle for these automaton class things. So even if you're doing a manufacturing robot, the entirety of the length of the arm of the robot is its environment, and it has to recognize it, what can exist, like a worker can exist in this environment. So even if you're getting a worker robot here, you do have to sort of this is still like applicable anyway. But the next thing is threat capacity prioritization, and what this is are like what can you basically, it's like here's the environment. I can recognize the environment, but what is going to be important? What is the most important things? And the most important things in the environment are extremely negative. It's not necessarily food that's going to screw you, but it's going to be like, oh no, here's a river, or here's a rock, or here's the, your first thing is always threat detection. And it's rather threat capacity prioritization, because if you start moving, the threat capacity grows. And when I'm talking about this, if you remember the VAT system from the Fallout series, everything sort of freezes when you get into this like aiming mode, and you get an option to sort of like center out a character model against the backdrop of the environment. And this is sort of the basis of how that robot is piecing together the data information it receives, because different obstacles in the environment are going to have a different threat to the robot. They're going to say, well, and this is expressed as what is the probability of a collision with object proximity here? What is the probability of, and you can express it as a computational probability function. You can sort of just say, here's this thing, don't run into it, as you're in if you're doing a code-based approach on this. Here's this, don't run into it. If you're within this distance, here's this percentage of your probability of running into this object. It could be 0. But if you're moving faster, that those calculations are going to change as you move within the environment. So that's why it's a type of being able to build the type of moving and environmentally stable automaton that is going to be actually, functional and working in a real world environment. And threat capacity prioritization can be something as your robot arm being able to recognize that there is an object within its radius of motion. So it can recognize that there will be impact, it's basically a type of impact recognition. Don't impact, and you don't want to impact with anything besides the ground. But part of this is your topography also moves. You know what I mean? So it's like you have to keep these processes always being refreshed. These calculations are always refreshed at the millisecond type of level to be able to have this truly sapient animal creature, artificial robot life thing, whatever. That's why it's nested prioritization, because within your environment, if it's an aquatic robot, you could have a whale blowing its mist from its blowhole kind of thing. But then there's the fish and a sea turtle and some garbage all floating around, in a boat nearby. So you have to sort of, in its environment, this water, this ocean water sky interface, it has to know what's around it and recognize what is dangerous, what is not dangerous, before it's able to recognize what it itself is able to do. And that's what makes Sapience prioritization really difficult, because it's all under a natural construction and natural order. Because if you're outside, you in your environment, it's like, well, you need to know what is or is not going to be food before, or what's going to compete with you for food, or what's going to compete with you for territory before you're able to actually do anything. Otherwise, that thing already, acted upon you. And that's sort of basically the way it's always been. So this brings us to self-capacity recognition. And the self-capacity recognition is, okay, I'm in an environment, I'm coming up to an obstacle that is recognizing as a potential threat or is a threat, and then what are you going to do about it? Here's my other hand. You have, rotation, you have this, you have musculature, you have your robot. This is where your self-aware robot has to come into play, where it's like, no, I have these arms, I can do these types of motions within this working frame. My working frame integration and my capacity and my self capacity recognition. So your robot has to recognize it's able to take this action independently given a situation, because the action is situation dependent, not program dependent. And that's why your robot sucks, because it's environmentally mediated. It's coming from the outside in. Your responses always come from the outside in. And here you are programming a world from the inside out, and it's fucking breaking every single time. It's from the outside in. And that's the biggest major breakthrough you're going to have, because why can't you take the motion capture guys with the ping pong balls on them, record a bunch of motions, and then have the robot spit that back and say, okay, play me back walking forward motion 12. And then have the robot recognize it can do walking motion forward 12, 15, 17, and 2 to be able to, you know what I mean? This is sort of where you're getting to these integrative AI things and iterative learning, where it's like, oh no, it can instead of piecing together these basic simulations from the start, here's somebody who's been walking for 1 billion years, and we're just going to make the robot mimic it. We should have given the robot all of its parts, and now the robot can walk because we just stuck a VHS up its asshole and away it went. So you need programmers to do that, but you don't need as many programmers to do that. And part of this is because it's a lot of the bulk information is already recorded. You just need the human machine translator. But knowing and making the robot an automaton aware of what it can actually do is itself capacity recognition. Same capacity recognition is I'm using same. Self is the self. Same is another robot, another person. It's friend recognition. Could be, yeah. But it's if you have these two automatons in the same room or the same warehouse with each other, they have to recognize that, okay, I am me. This other obstacle shares a capacity similar or identical to myself. So that makes it more, it opens up possibilities for, it can cooperate. It starts getting the human qualities that form personality. It's they're like a child in school. It's it can talk to each other. It can build other things with itself. It can avoid, they can strategize and avoid each other on routes, knowing that they both have the same, avoidance. They can both make the same right hand turn and avoid each other and continue on their way instead of colliding and breaking like that $1 million worth of infrastructure. That same capacity recognition, and when you have to deploy that out in the field as any type of set 2 robots in a field for 40 hours and then make them encounter each other, recognizing each other in a sort of unprogrammed context. They still have to go through. They're both going to have environmental signal recognition. They're going to recognize each other as an obstacle in their threat capacity prioritization. They're going to recognize themselves and what they can do to avoid that threat. But then they're also going to say like, okay, well, you get this other extra layer of computation here where it's like, oh no, I realize that this other person is like me. We can do something together. And that's sort of like, oh, okay, that's a different that's Sapience. That's where you're getting into. It's not drone collision, but it's an actual it's an actual internal type of autonomous processing, so that you don't have to program every single line of code. It's like, oh, well, we can, if it's like, what do two people do when they encounter each other? They say hello, they shake each other's hand, they talk, they find a common reason to work together. They, go off, they say goodbye and they go off on their merry ways. They talk about the weather or something like that. But that's same capacity recognition. If they don't have the same capacity, then you still get a perception of other. And this is something more of like, if you're sending one of those if you're doing an oceanic exploration robot, automaton robot, like those tuna robots, you want them to be able to integrate with its species that it's modeled after. So you want some behavioral, oh look, we can all, you have to anthropomorphize everything because you have to anthropomorphize everything. It's an automaton. You have to get into the mindset where it's like, yeah, I might be a mechanical freak show, but I can still swim, 60 miles an hour. You'd still able to have school formation. You can get your atmospheric weather pattern data from these, from a school of robot fish. But that's sort of the thing about the real world and how accumulating knowledge of multiple participants in various hostile situations. So like you could have a game like you can train your robot in Call of Duty, your robot's AI in Call of Duty, with people in its virtual sort of environment, so that it can learn exactly what I'm talking about. Where is your automaton's priorities in Call of Duty? Because you have an environment, and the environment isn't, it's a variable, it's highly varied environment. There's a lot of collision, and there's you can drown. There is an environmental negative. There's such an environmental negative and a penalty that it's as much as a priority. Like the least thing you're thinking about is like, even when I play, the last thing I'm thinking about is myself and what I can do, because it's a very hostile, it's a mature hostile game kind of thing. But at the same time, on the flip side, it shows you how your own decision making is adapting and evolving under that type of intensity. So that's where the self-preservation ultimatum comes in. And sort of each automaton has to have this as like it, the nested prioritization computing is optimizing for this self-preservation ultimatum, because why would the robot want itself to why would you want the robot to destroy itself? Because you took the time, you programmed it and did all this other stuff, but from point A to objective B, it has to stay alive and it has to make its decisions, not just for objective B, it has to go to objective C, D, and E. You want your robot extracted. You want welcome home, space robot. I want my space minerals from Mars. I just don't want to throw, I don't want Mars to be an iron scrapyard. I want minerals off of Mars. So your objective, it's extremely important to be able to have this self-preservation ultimatum built, like just almost hardwired into the processing. Because it doesn't really matter what environment. Like, I can take a person and drop them in the Sahara. I can take a person and drop them in the Amazon. They can go to the Rockies. They can go to Antarctica. This is sort of the, you can go to the Ural Mountains. This is the versatility of life on this planet. And your automatons and your robots and your Tesla bots have to match it. You can dumb down their analytical motives, or really just like, this is your one objective, this is your motive, just do this. But they're your children and you're setting them loose. So that's sort of the like, oh no, if they behave like children, people are a little bit more, at ease. You got a bunch of Rosie the robots running around, nobody cares. You got a bunch of Terminators running around. That's a little bit of a different story, but kind of nobody cares. So that's sort of why it's there, because you're programming this robot for self-preservation to be able to do what you want it to do in the real world environments that you typically have adult human workers doing. Which is like, okay, well, this is how you achieve that without, programming like 40 quintillion lines of code. Like an idiot, basically. So this is where it's like, okay, well, now you have these robots in the environment and they're going to need power. So what with power capture here, you're going to need, I'm using a fuel cell. You can use solar power. You can use something like that. It's basically, how are you going to power this robot for extended periods of time in the field? Are you going to have to hook its robot nipples up to a car battery every 12 hours? No. You might have to, put a solar panel array out once every 6. You might have to go to a charging station every 5. People eat, 7, noon, and 6. Once every 6 hours, a human being will eat. So this fully expect your automatons to have to only have a 6-hour charge on them. And that's sort of what we're looking at, or having to replenish their batteries or their energy. If it's it can run on diesel, it has to fill its tank every 6 hours. Otherwise, it shuts down and stops working. And this is part of its self-preservation ultimatum. It has to be able to, power capture from the environment. So this is where it's like, if you got a fuel cell robot, it only has to drink. It could be in the middle of the ocean. It never needs to refuel ever again. It just it's surrounded by fuel. But you still have your power storage and your power utilization, because you always need a fat store. It's your fat store. So you can capture power, but you have to storage it also, and you have to I'm gonna say meet it out, but you have to distribute its power effectively, and that's why you're gonna structure this thing like a human or an animal, because your musculature and your locomotion stuff is not your internal processing type of stuff. And when you have like, so if even with people, when you have your fight or flight kind of response here, it's like, okay, you're running, but you shut down your higher types of computational capacity when you're running or sprinting, because locomotion so it's like basically you're shutting down same capacity recognition, and pumping out environmental signal recognition would go straight through the roof. So this is where it's nested, where it's like the priorities in actions are kind of always just like different mountains are higher than other mountains, and they're constantly shifting and moving, determining what this internal thought process and internal logic is going to be doing for your robot. And it's all run through your computer. So basically, if you got a PS5, if a fly can do it, so can so can your cell phone. There's enough computation power in your cell phone to be able to run a fish, and that's good enough, because you can get relay data and all this other type of information from a fish robot with a cell phone. So it's not like it was in the 60s where you needed to have these like massive computers. The computation is already done. Boom, you're golden. Okay, so sensors. This kind of goes hand in hand. It's like, well, you're gonna need a camera. You're gonna need an olfactory. You should have some type of like olfactory chronographic thing. Pressure, temperature, sound, a microphone, all of the things you want your automaton to do and your person to do, you have to recapitulate it. You have gyroscopes. One of the other things I'm insistent on is when you start doing your body awareness type of work, and I hope your programmers do body awareness type of stuff, because for the males, your testicles, and for the females, your breasts, there is a very real capacity and requirement for those organs to contribute to balance. They are some of the most important organs that contribute to balance, because they are your self-preservation ultimatum organs. When they dangle and when they flop around and when they jiggle around, when they make their own sound, when you're running, they're bouncing everywhere. But the programmer and the robot, you're having balance issues with your robot because you're not programming an extra set of lower limb gyroscopes to account for the different biomechanical stresses going up the trunk of the armature of the robot itself. So the skeleton of the robot has a hip gyroscope because you have testicles, because you have ovaries, because you have a lower pelvic floor. Your muscles already do this automatically, but when you're looking at a robot frame, you have to have this type of gyroscope already embedded in those lower extremities, that lower hip base quadrant, because you yourself have it. When you're not making that human robot connection because you didn't give literally your robot a pair of balls. It is the difference between like 6 days of work or 6 years of work, because you're like shy and not giving your robot a penis or a pair of tits. That's really kind of what it is, because you think that, oh, your inner ear and your gyroscope and all this. No, it's the human body, and the form of the human is far more integrated than you're actually letting on here. And anybody in sports medicine or Tai Chi or, or adult entertainment will tell you, like, yeah, it's way more connected than you're kind of letting on with these just walking robots. Because you're focusing on the programming and ignoring the anatomy of yourself. As soon as you get past that, it's like if you build a robot dog without a pair of balls, it's like, why did you build a dog in the first place? It's like building a robot fish without a swim bladder. You know what I mean? Like, you really have, like, you're copying a form that took 20 million years, and then you're like retarding it to failure, and then wondering why is it retarded, because you retarded it. Shit for brains, like, you know what I mean? So that's sort of where sensors and armature come in. Everything within hardware works like you're just taking a skeleton and rebuilding it from there. The hard part's over when you get the decision maker up and running, but that's basically it, because you've already sort of mastered all of this other stuff in terms of computation and machinery and the environmental detection through your heavy industries, through all of these other industrial components, like your sensors all come from industrial steel, because they're all detecting ions in water, or they're detecting pressure, or they're detecting, you're pulling from a different industry to make your robot. Consolidated Robot Emporium Incorporated, but all of the other components and things that you need and want to go onto your robot's frame to make it, the automaton of your, to make your princess, is already kind of done. You just have to assemble the kit in the instruction manual and sell it on Amazon. Actuators are just like, how are you going to move your limbs? How do they move your limbs? There's like, there's different ways of moving it. Servo motors is one. You can have, there were some cool ones that are like hydraulic muscles that were kind of cool. MIT did those. It looks like a spindly sort of like noodle arm, but when they start pulling different levers, it's flexing and behaving like muscle is, like an artificial muscle, just to move with an electrical, conductivity, motility kind of stuff. So all of your parts are there. The hardware is easy. Unless you're getting to like extreme stresses and stuff. But now sort of what makes robotics so incredibly difficult is the application, because your robot has to be, so the way this kind of worked in the past was each robot had to be custom built for a specific and custom application, and then a small little industry propped up around, okay, well, we make car manufacturing or robot arm manufacturing robotics. With the advent of all of this artificial intelligence now, is that the inverse is happening, where here is the general purpose robot. You just have to make your general purpose robot fit your specific application. You have to teach your robot what you want it to do and only what you want it to do, and then set it to work. But the robot's capable of learning because it's computer is sophisticated enough that it's not just, okay, robot, here's a set of instructions. Do this motion over and over again. It's now, here is the grand scheme design. Here's how all the parts and components are assembled. Here's how you and the other robot are going to work together to put all this thing together. So that's what really changed application in the last, and this is like really recent, maybe like the last 5 to 10 years. It's going to be coming up really hard in the next 5 years, but that's that's the big major shift that's happening here, is that, well, I need a care robot. I need a surgical robot. I need a robot that's not so fucking stupid as to be locked to the set of parameters that was initially given to it by the programmer themselves. So that's really what's changing here is that, okay, now that we have all of these computers and artificial intelligences to be able to do something, we're putting it all together to make a robot that isn't so fucking retarded, it's actually practical for like the household or everyday use. So application is not so much specific anymore. It's very broad and very general. So some of the major applications currently are analysis robots, assistance robots, entertainment robots, exploration robots, manufacturing robots, and military robots. And there's nothing really too much. It's sort of like, here are different situations in which these robotic companies are going to be like, are basically propping themselves up right now. So if you're anywhere in laboratory research, instrumentation, they already kind of have their own sort of like robotics. How, you know, certain industries and certain businesses and certain applications don't require anything more. Like, they'll never require the automaton. Like, some places, you'll never really require an automaton in a laboratory. It's not that type of laboratory. But for a robot to be able to work, or even a remote controlled droid, so you have one person here hooked up to like a marionette, a virtual marionette. So you have the puppeteer on one side, and then the robot in a clean room. You know, that's gonna save the person all this time, you know, suiting up and stripping down for electronics development, or, you know, infectious disease work. Because now the person doesn't actually have to go into the laboratory. So you just saved all of your expertise's lives without having to actually get them, you know, hands-on nitty-gritty anymore. So that's where sort of analysis comes in. Assistance. So help assistance with the elderly, just being able to make food, take care of them. Those maid robot cafes you kind of see. This is where these applications and these types of robots are coming through. Certain areas need more human qualities than others. That's totally true. They're, you know, animatronic Muppets for the elderly homes. That's something we see in the promotional videos. Like the expo type, the robot expo type of what people are like sort of saying, okay, we can do. It's more of like, we found this application, but and we can build this robot, but they kind of just stop there. Assistance, or even just carts in the hospital, just robotic carts driving around in the hospital, being able to, oh wait, here's collision obstacles, or here's a person, you know, the person's, you know, helping me, or I have to help the person, but, you know, do I need to stop at every person and never, you know, get to my objective or get to the place where I want to be? So there's all of these things that are in consideration here. Entertainment robots, pleasure robots, if you want to go that far. But no, I'm thinking more like Chuck E. Cheese, kind of like animatronic, like, you know, Jurassic Park dinosaur kind of, you know, get a rhinoceros brain and a maybe not a rhinoceros brain and a triceratops, but like nerfed rhinoceros in a triceratops, you know, robot body kind of thing, or even an actual extinct species kind of reprogrammed from what we knew about it, kind of thing. And its environment, and then, you know, just set it loose back there till, I don't know, we lost the form, but, you know, here's a robot. Consolation prize, maybe. Exploration, this is more like to mining and deep sea exploration and outer space exploration, where you need a lot of independent thought to be able to handle a lot of independent situations, because not every you're gonna go crazy trying to program every situation. So you do need like you need a sapience in exploration, but not necessarily in manufacturing. So it really sort of depends on like the scale of what you're trying to do here. If you're just trying to get a robot to pick up a pencil and write your name with it, you know, that's sort of a kit you can sell on Amazon. Here, sign my name. You know, but the factory that makes, I don't know, I think it was the PS2. The PS2 factory was fully automated, kind of thing. That full integration system is closer to what this, like the full Sapience is kind of like pushing on. It's nowhere close to it because it's still just an automated machine. It's not a robot. The factory doesn't get up and walk around. That being said, fishing vessels with their fishing and cruise and ocean liner ships with their atmospheric telemetry stuff, like their weather pattern stuff. Yeah, that's totally a different story. That's a totally different set of protocols for development. There's a totally different set of applications with manufacturing, and that kind of pushes us into military here, where it's just like, well, you're gonna have these military robots that are gonna be like your drones. A drone, like the website talks about, you can have a fuel cell robot that's able to remain aloft by drinking moisture from clouds and converting that into a hydrogen fuel, and just, you know, staying aloft for forever, indefinitely, and powering its systems that way with a bit of solar mixed in. So you want something like that to say, you know what, it's a non-intervention, but it's an observer, and it just exists. Outer space is like that too. You want something that's able to go from one extreme to the other, and you're not going to be able to hold its hand. And you don't want to send people for 16 months to Mars and then 16 months back. It's a 5-year mission. You know, I don't want to spend 5 years doing it. I want to send a robot that can go. I want to send a robot that can build its own robot factory on Mars out of the Martian minerals that are still, you know, blowing in the wind and laying on the surface. That's the type of, like, yeah, we're going to throw a factory first and have it, you know, build a little robot community to build us habitat first, before I send a person to, you know, basically to their death. 100 million miles away and minimum 5-year, you know, five year rescue mission. I don't think so. But this is where you sort of segue between application and like the difficulty here is like application and environment are so intertwined that it's a structure and function relationship all the time with this stuff. And when you try and delineate or make specific, you have to make specific the general case without any generalities or any specifics about it. And you're just left with, you know, good old enzyme structure and function. Type of ideologies here from biology. So in biology, you have everything in biology and enzymes is structure and function. Here's the shape. It has sort of evolved and adapted to fulfill a functional role. So does every robot. And every robot fulfills this functional shape. That's sort of what makes robotics difficult, because until you really narrow down what structure and functional shape what function are you fulfilling, and what function are you fulfilling dictates its shape, and what shape sort of allows you to see what function it's fulfilling. So if you want a racing robot, you're not gonna make it like 5,000 pounds. You're gonna make it out of like carbon fiber, you know, carbon fiber batwing exoskeleton type of stuff. It's gonna half float as it runs, kind of thing. Or a fish or something like that. That's the real difficulty here, and making, if I just want a made robot, yeah, it'll be made out of like a lightweight steel or aluminum, or brushed nickel aluminum or something like that, because it's not going to be lifting more than 50 pounds. It's not going to be doing other stuff. It's a household robot that cooks, cleans, and does the dishes. Does it need to do anything else? It's like, no. Oh, it needs to make the beds and it needs to fold the clothes, but other than that, it doesn't really need to do anything. Do you want the outside lawnmower? Well, then you have to get another one for the lawnmower, because why? Why do I need another one for outside? Why can't I just give the actual lawnmower to the robot and say, okay, go with it? Well, we didn't build the robot strong. We didn't build the inside house robot strong enough to push the outside work. So that's sort of where it's like, oh, okay, well, you really have to know what you're at. Like, household applications and the household environment has, a 70 kilogram robot being able to push 150 newtons forwards and forwards and backwards and not break over repetitive use, and probably avoid inclement weather. So that's sort of the future of robotics. Where's Rosie come in here? And can she mow the lawn, and can she blow the snow? Can you do my driveway? My robot's got to do my driveway in 3 feet of snow in February. They got to cross the snow, start up the snow blower, push the snow blower, and put it back within like hour working frame. That's a shit test right there. Do my driveway in February. So environment and temperature. So temperature is going to be your biggest bitch, because from minus 40 to plus 40 Celsius, you're going from like 0 Fahrenheit to 100 Fahrenheit, 105, 115 Fahrenheit. And you still have to be able, like, human beings don't even function in that. Human beings don't actually function in that full temperature gap. How do you expect a robot to? And then you want to send the robot to space and go work in, like, iron production facilities in a volcano or something like that. Or drop them to the bottom of the ocean and have them just walk around at the bottom of the ocean, photographing stuff. So again, it's all material. It goes back to your real electronics and your materials and what's the robot made out of dictates how much, how expensive it's going to be. It's just like, can we get a general robot and put protective equipment onto the general robot? That's kind of the way it's going to go, because you already have a lot of personal protective equipment. Or you get like an adaptive AI that I upload it to a robotic drone for deep sea exploration, and it's able to integrate itself with what's available and just sort of like, behave as as a regular pilot would for an extended period of time, and then bring it back. So that's sort of like, well, robotic applications in different environments. But so for environments, we're looking at just extreme environments here of like temperature, chemical and corrosive environments, pressurized environments, and non-pressurized environments. So outer space and the deep ocean, and sort of everything in between. Combat environments, because let's face it, they're a major purchaser. And disinfection. The military is a major purchaser of robotics. And disinfection. Both in terms of, I want to call it sterility, but I don't like the sterility of it. It's like you have your surgical robots, and then you have like your electronic clean room robots, and then you have your like, level 4 COVID type of research robots kind of thing, or your chemical production robots, your glove box robots kind of thing. So those are the major environments, and you really have to how do you clean them? How do you maintain them? What are the, it just kind of spirals off crazy on here. But these are things to consider about how and where and why these sapient robots are going to be able to do their job. Are they going to be able to work? Are they going to be able to do what you need them to do? Like, you might have the smartest robot, but your robot fell apart because you didn't use the right materials and sent it into a caustic environment, and the damn thing rusted. Well, now it's big, now it's smart, but it's, a big pile of junk. So that's kind of what this wheel is really teaching at. So you might be a really good programmer, but you're shit for that type of material selection processes. It's there to say, okay, if you're going to do this, you need to have you need to find someone or get the specialty answered in each of these different sort of sections for your specific application. And that's what makes it so difficult. And expensive. It's super expensive. Mostly just because of the man hours, because you got to put it together and get the people to coordinate, and the people, they're eating from 7 to noon to 7 again, and they have to have their breaks in between, and and they're socializing and their joke time, and there's a lot. But what I wanted to go with military here on the application side of it is more of like bomb drone type of, when they send those they're like bomb drones. They just go in there and then the robots that do the bomb diffusing, instead of using a person, the person controls the robot, and okay, so we blew up a robot, but we didn't lose any lives. Nobody was injured. That's a win. That's a win. But yeah, that type of stuff. Clearing landmines. People think it's all like military combat. It's like the Killbot factory. The Killbot factory. No, it's not Killbot factory. It's more of like, well, you find a better way to disarm landmines then. Well, just send a whole bunch of like little worm burrowing, take his boring company and make a miniaturized version of that, and just blow up a whole bunch of landmines in situ. That's possible now. That was get a whole bunch of little worms, set them loose in the ground, and have them explode up the landmines. They're cheap, they're disposable. All they gotta do is trigger, and you're done. You don't want them exploded, or like, it's that, or you gotta go do it yourself and risk the human lives. So it's like, easy to put in, easy to take out. But that's sort of where I was coming with military stuff, because it's more, I don't know, robotics is more about saving lives and making like dangerous work less dangerous, or pleasurable work more pleasurable. But that's sort of the idea here, where it is case by case and situation. But having to keep all of that, so it's like this wheel, and then we're back at nested prioritization computing, because all of your robots are going to have this in some way, shape, or form, unless it's just a straight like automation program, which is closer to a machine for me. So the way I have this is there's electronics, there are machines, and then there's robotics. Robotics is always going to touch on artificial life, sapience, sentience, automatons, the whole data from Star Trek kind of, okay, we made, what the hell did we use him? What the hell is he good for now? We made him. What's he good for? Versus the machines where it's just like, we just want our beer bottles filled by the same, in the same amount every time. That's still an automated robot, but it's closer to a machine because it's not doing any like independent calculations. It's just doing. It's done a pre-programmed measurement and it just does it repeatedly. There's that like for me that's almost enzymatics than it is robotics. The cell is the robot to the enzyme that is the machine. But both of them are going to have like programming associated with them. You know what I mean? The ribosome versus the cell itself. But that's our hour. Well, that's our hour. Robots was fun. Robots is the hardest because it's like you come up in a world. You grow up in a world with robotics everywhere. You get introduced to these like robotic characters. So Botsmaster was a good show back in the early 90s. It lasted for like a season or two. But it sort of says, it's like, well, here is a sapient. Here's a general. The guy, Ziv Zoolander, makes a general sapient robot. But then he just like personality and application swaps them all with his sister, and that sort of just sets the stage for this wheel where it's just like, well, how the hell do you come up with these, like, where do they come, like, how do you just sort of like do this and what do you use them for? But with the patent, there's always that capacity that the CGP gets added to as a power capture. Because the CGP functions as a fuel cell with certain materials, that can be added to the robot itself. Specifically the U.S. patent has it. The CGP is attached to the armature, and then goes from there. And whether whether or not you have an extremely intelligent computer or something that is closer to an actual just like movement machine, we've entered the world of robotics, and this is what the world of robotics looks like. And this is, how other people have envisioned robots to look and act and behave. And it's like, let's give Dr. Carroll a CGP and have him fly around, and that qualifies as innovative potential. Let's give Gur a CGP and that qualifies as innovative potential. Give a Tesla bot a CGP and it qualifies as innovative potential. Give the Terminator a battery and a pencil lead and it qualifies as innovative potential. So that's sort of, give one of those Sex Pistons a CGP and it qualifies as innovative potential. That kind of gives, like there are so many robots. It's such a huge, like the largest net we could throw was thrown, and these are the things that are coming up in it. It's like, well, how do I teach my pharmacists about robotics, and are they going to be wanting to, no, you're going to have the roboticist that wants to do an operation more in line than the drug developer wanting to develop robot drugs or drugs for these robots. There's sort of like, there's a forward and back, there's your x-axis, our z-axis, our y-axis, and then our x-axis kind of thing. And it's like, well, how the hell do you keep stuff, like these wheels are how you keep stuff straight, because each discipline and each university program is going to have people like, at least, okay, I can kind of understand what he's talking about when this when this whole thing is taken in, and yeah, it's basically this whole wheel is the university program in and of itself. By the time you're done university, if you got we've reached a time where it's like you don't get a PhD in robotics until you build me one of these things. That's how it works. You're not getting a PhD in robotics until you run this wheel, and because that's what the PhD is worth. Or you're not getting a robot patent until you beat a bad fuel cell robot that can cure cancer. That's that's the new industry standard. That's innovative potential, and that's our time for today. So just enjoy yourselves and have a good evening. We're After Darks and we're all adults, so yeah.